Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Randy Horton, Chief Solutions Officer at Orthogonal. On behalf of Bernhard Kappa and myself, want to welcome you all and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come here. This webinar is part of our Move Fast and Break Nothing webinar series, which we started in 2022 and have been continuing through into 2023, really looking at different ways that medical device companies can accelerate patient outcomes getting better sooner through the use of modern software engineering and product management techniques. We've had a pretty good wide variety of webinars, and we are always looking for suggestions on future topics. So if you have any, please send them in to us. We have a really great group of people here today. We're excited to share and talk about this topic. Our goals for you today are us to have an interesting and timely discussion, and to leave all of you in the audience with a couple gold nuggets that you can take away and use in your job, in your organization right now. We welcome questions. We will address them during the core webinar as we can, and if not, at the end. And as is our tradition at these webinars, basically we promise in the next 50 minutes, we will cover all the core content of the webinar and take a few questions. However, we will stay on a full 90 minutes, so that's to 1:30 p.m. Eastern, as long as there's additional questions that people want to ask. And actually, we've had a pretty good retention rate of people hanging in through 90 minutes. We love these things and we're happy to continue the conversation. With that, let me first invite all of our panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to go through the order on my Zoom screen. So let's start with Zenius.
Hi, thanks, Randy. I'm Xenios Pavadimitris. I'm at Yale. I'm a professor here in biomedical engineering and radiology. I teach a class in medical software, and I prepare some materials, a textbook and a Coursera class, and we'll get into that more later in the session. Thanks.
Melissa.
Hi, my name is Melissa Gill, and I'm a product owner and project manager at Orthogonal. I have a background in technology in various roles for about the last 20 years, doing quality assurance before I got into project management and agile practices. And I made the transition from standard tech to MedTech about 2 years ago.
Larkin?
Yeah, hi, Larkin Lowry. I've spent the last 25 years in software engineering, either building software engineering organizations and product development organizations, or repairing broken ones. I've spent most of my time outside of medical, largely IoT, highly focused on that. One of the companies that I helped build, we sold to Verizon. It became Verizon Telematics. That was in the fleet management, IoT tracking, telemetry type of a space. I spent almost 3 years as a senior director of software engineering for Tandem Diabetes Care. They make an insulin pump, and my responsibility was for digital health and their analytics platform to support their diabetes therapy offerings.
Bernhard.
I'm Bernhard Kappa, the founder and CEO of Orthogonal. Been in software development for quite a number of years. And then about 12 years ago, found my way into the medical space, in particular the medical device space, and had some interesting experiences trying to bring the best practices from outside of medical device into medical device, and understanding the constraints and the language of medical device. So, a lot of learning of how to understand and bring these disparate things together. So, we do lots of development of connected device systems and work with customers like with Larkin at Tandem, and I have to hire both software developers, but also quality systems engineers, POs, regulatory folks, and human factors folks, and integrate them together, and then work with our customers, some of whom are very agile and some of whom are not for various reasons. So, topic that is near and dear to my heart, and looking forward to the great conversation today.
Excellent. It's really interesting to see the variety of people, and also that we have a group of people who were not born MedTech necessarily, but are deep and fully in MedTech now, which I think is a great perspective for this. I'll just say about myself, without getting into too much detail, the easiest way to describe me, they used to call me a jack of all trades, master of none, but then some business and social science professors got together and decided to give me a fancier title, deep generalist. I happen to like that. It sounds just better than jack of all trades, master of none. Sounds like there's more to it. All right, so today's topic is about growing tech professionals into MedTech professionals. And really the genesis of this is that there's been a lot of interest for reasons we'll get into, and a lot of challenges for reasons we'll get into, bringing in people who came from generally great software organizations that were outside of medical device. They might have been clinical organizations of other types, but or from other industries, bringing people from logistics and social media who say, gee, medical devices sound really rewarding and important, and we're doing great stuff, and it's a lot more interesting than doing a 19th B2B e-commerce shopping cart. And then they get in and they kind of look around and go, this is really hard. And some of this feels really archaic, and I don't get why, and I'm not enjoying it. And when things go well, these people can bring a lot to the organizations. But what we hear consistently in the industry is a lot of times it doesn't go well. And you end up almost with sort of a mulligan, to use the Gulf term, because people come and you have these expectations of what they're going to bring with their skills and their knowledge and their enthusiasm. And they end up sort of leaving dispirited and frustrated, and nobody feels like they get enough out of it. So we want to talk about today is, why is some of this happening? And then what do we do about it? What are the success factors? Because I think we're all still, as people who've moved into MedTech from other software arenas, we're all very passionate about this. And really excited about what we can do. So, and actually it was funny, before in our banter in the speakers lobby before we came out here, Zanios, who's originally from Cyprus, made the comment that in Greek Cyprus, you could tell somebody's politics by which soccer team they root for. And Larkin made the comment, you can tell what industry somebody was grew up in, if it's MedTech or not, based on the things they say in a business meeting in a MedTech firm. So with all of that, let's start with, why does this matter? Why does MedTech even need people from tech? And I'll throw this out to all of you. Take a whack.
Well, I'll jump in. So, I came to MedTech from a pretty substantial career outside of MedTech. And, what I came to realize pretty quickly is that the overall level of investment in software engineering, technology, practices, et cetera, that level of investment is many orders of magnitude higher outside of MedTech than it is inside, right? MedTech is really just a small subset of the overall software engineering space. So a lot of the people outside of MedTech have a much greater diversity of experience. They've used different tools, they've used different techniques, they've had different deployment environments. They've just had a greater breadth of experience than what I was finding within the MedTech space. And I think it's just natural. Like I said, MedTech is just, it's in terms of overall total dollars and body counts, it's just smaller. And so what I wanted to do is to bring in all of that experience and all that value from the outside world, but at the same time, get these folks to be able to behave in the manner that could actually support the business and be productive, and so that they could produce compliant and safe software. Sometimes that's hard, sometimes that's not so hard, but really it was getting that diversity of thought and experience into the organization that it was what I was going for.
Yeah, I would say, one reason why this is important, if you look at, the trends in general, but certainly within medical devices, right? Software has become more and more and more important, and more of kind of the the value in medical devices has come from software, and in many cases also leveraging some of the same technologies that have been transformative in other industries, cloud, connectivity, mobile, Internet of Things, etc. All of these things have transformed many industries. That trend has been a little bit slower in the medical devices space because of, regulations, because in general of the complexity of of how things get paid for. It's not really a free market in the way that many other things are. But nevertheless, those same trends that have transformed other industries are transforming medical devices. And outside of medical devices, we've developed lots of approaches and techniques to really get greater reliability, greater safety, and faster innovation going. And so, part of the challenge is bringing those into the medical device space so we can improve patient outcomes faster and leverage these technologies and these processes.
Excellent.
And one thing just to pile on to that is, the outside world is unconstrained, right? It's unregulated. It's a total free for all. But, because it's unconstrained, experiments are allowed to happen out there that aren't allowed to happen within the medical device space. And because of that, one of the things that I guess I've become more aware of after having spent now time in MedTech is that the tools and the processes that exist in the outside world are operating in a symbiotic relationship, right? They are feeding back into each other. The tool affects the process affects how the tools develop, right? They go together. And it reminds me a lot of the idea of cloud native development versus a lift and shift, right? You can take your monolithic on-prem application and deploy it in the cloud, right? You can lift and shift that whole thing up into the cloud and it will work, and it will work fine, but you're not getting any of the value of the cloud, right? The cloud evolved the way that it is because it has certain properties that make using it in that way advantageous. And so if you're not using it in the way that it was intended, you're just not going to get the value from it. And so, what I see within MedTech is that the processes by which we perform our product development are so constrained by our interpretation of FDA requirements that there's really a lot of friction in terms of being able to develop and evolve our internal development processes. So in a sense, when we do pull in technology that was developed outside, because we're less flexible in adjusting our internal development process, we're actually getting less value out of the technology that we're pulling in, because that technology was developed in a particular context to be used in a particular way in a particular development environment that may not exist within our medical device company. So, part of what is important for me is to look at, not just the, the skills and experience that these people bring in, but, their tool use and how that tool use may encourage us to think about changes to our processes so that we can get better use out of those tools, get much more productivity out of the tools, much more value out of those tools, use them actually the way the tools are intended. But to get that value, we have to change how we actually do our processes, right? So, we have to be comfortable with making some amount of change on our side within the medical device company so that we can get the full value of what we're bringing in from the outside.
Yeah. And I think just building on some of the points that Larkin has made, and if we think about the agile processes to kind of connect it back to that piece, you can follow a very regimented, and this is the Scrum rules way of approaching agile, and we do sprints this way, and we have these columns on our board, and we do this process. But if you think back to the original principles that guided the Agile Manifesto, it's not that we don't have processes and tools, and especially in medical device software, we need processes and tools to make sure that we are developing safe software, that we are keeping patients safe while we are bringing them outcomes. But those are still, should always be in service to working software that meets patient needs, and bringing that agile mindset into it to be willing to look at what are our processes and tools, are they working, are they serving the purposes that they need to get to, and looking at how we've interpreted some of the FDA guidelines or other industry practices, like this is done this way. Does it need to be done this way, or is there a better way that we can do that? Can we bring this new thinking in to help evolve our processes and tools and get us to that ultimate goal of working safe software? Randy, you're on mute.
Thank you. For those of you not reading lips. Great. No, these are great perspectives. Melissa, I love having you here because in some ways I view you almost as the fact checker, since you're the one who's closest on the ground every day to people actually building software and leading teams. So it's great to hear your perspective combined with, these other ones. It's funny. We've had a couple of comments come in, and I actually just want to comment on them. One was really heartwarming. It said, "Thank you, Larkin. My daughter uses Tandem. It's critical to her care." So that's a really nice part of our industry when we get to have conversations like that. And the other one, I just have to comment, Greg wrote, "I'm joining you from NY/SF and greatly appreciate you all for doing this." So Greg, you're everything everywhere all at once right now. You're in New York and San Francisco. That's a new one for us, but I think there's a lot of potential with that. So thank you. We'll get to some of the more serious questions now, but why don't we continue?
Well, if I can just interrupt for a second, I want to just touch on the comment about Tandem, and then also, Greg's comment just briefly. So one thing about Tandem that really got my attention was when I was being recruited in, I was doing my homework, and I found a lot of people blog posting about with the new closed loop control algorithm that they got the best night's sleep they've had in 10 years, right? Because of the product. And, I saw that over and over again. I thought, okay, this is actually affecting people's quality of life. Me as a connoisseur of sleep, I can appreciate, the value of that. And, one of the things that I encountered when we were recruiting people in from outside industries is, we got quite a few people that were coming from, big well-known companies like TikTok and Netflix, who came to us and said, "I can't do it anymore. I can't do this social media stuff. I can't do this stuff anymore. I need to do something that's actually going to put good energy into the universe," right? And they saw MedTech as a way to actually help people, right? So I think, there's a very positive aspect to recruiting people in for this reason. People getting burnt out by just the pure, kind of carnage that exists, on the outside, and actually having an opportunity to do something positive for people's lives. So, I thought that was something that was very positive. But, in terms of what, Greg was saying is that, part of what I kind of encounter and have problems with, acclimating folks into MedTech is, as Greg's pointing out, right? I mean, we're trying to make sure that we don't hurt people, right? That we don't kill them, we don't maim them, we don't cause them, serious injury, and certainly, in the outside world, we have very similar concerns where, we don't want to cost people money, right? We don't want to, in your bank transaction, accidentally debit $100,000 out of your account instead of $100. Likewise, for our employer, we want to make sure that we don't introduce a bug that's going to cost the company $10 million an hour, for the next 3 days until we fix the bug. So, we definitely have very large economic consequences that we're trying to protect against in the outside world. It's I don't want to compare, the value of a human life versus dollars, but in terms of raw dollars, the exposure risk on the outside can actually be substantially larger. And so, people out there do think this way, right? They do think about quality, but the approach that they take is a little bit different. But I don't think that it is so different that you can't take a person from the outside and train them how to do things on the inside. I think it's a matter of translation, and I think that it will make sense to them.
So
Yeah,
that's
and I
actually
think
a
kind of,
segue. Sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
On that, and kind of addressing one of the questions that I saw in the chat about how training people up on the quality and regulations for this space. The regulations in the medtech space are unique to it, but it's not the only regulated industry. There's telecom regulations. And so there's a lot of tech people that may come to medtech having experience with working within the bounds of regulation that aren't necessarily medtech. But I think one of the important things about training people up who are being exposed to the medtech regulations for the first time is really, I think it's important to not just focus on, we do this and this is this document and this is this regulation and we do this process, but making sure that they understand the why behind it, because that can help turn it from, I've got to do this thing, or why are they doing this to me, or this is so bloated, or whatever kind of negative reactions people might have, truly understand the why. And ultimately those whys connect things back to patient safety and the type of costs that can or shouldn't be measured in dollars. And it helps people understand, especially coming from a project management agile process type perspective. If I understand why something is there, I can help work with how to integrate those processes, how to make those processes faster, lighter, more efficient, but retain that why that is the reason that they're there in the first place.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's going on in the outside world that makes what Melissa was saying a little bit easier for the engineers is there's a trend that I actually don't agree with, which is a lot of companies are doing away with their quality organizations within software. And they are instead taking the approach that software engineers need to own quality. They need to be responsible for quality. They need to enforce quality. And really, quality from, in a software organization is really a software engineering exercise anyway. We're not taking, sorry, I've got my ruler in my hand. We're not taking our rulers and measuring things. We're not weighing them on a scale. We're not even anymore having people, going around clicking buttons. It's really, a software engineering exercise to verify our implementations and to make sure that they're bug free. And so that's why a lot of these companies have shifted over to this idea that we don't need a QA department. What we need are the engineers to own the quality, be responsible for it, to enforce the quality. And if you have somebody that has come from that kind of an environment and you drop them into MedTech, their brain is already pre-wired to think about quality and how to do it, right? And how to achieve it because they're doing it in their jobs in the outside world. I don't want to get on my soapbox about why I disagree with that particular approach, but that is something that I do consider valuable from the outside is folks with that experience.
So quickly, go ahead, Brandon.
I was going to say, we, this group had talked, a couple days ago in preparation for this, and I think Xenios had mentioned one of the things he does in his classes, and one of the sort of fundamental issues is that people don't really understand and speak each other's language. And I wanted to kind of turn it over to Xenios on that to really sort of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so if we leave the class for a little bit later, but yeah, it's an immigration problem, right? So people are moving from one country to another country. There are similarities, there are differences. And even though we speak English in the English-speaking world, we don't use those words to mean the same thing, right? Those of you who come from like a machine learning background will use validation in a way that it's not the way it would be used in the medical device industry. One is like parameter tuning, the other is like the final step before you get through to clinical use almost. So there's a lot of those barriers, and I think the challenge isn't just bringing in people, but how the organization adapts to having those people. It's a two-way street, right? You're bringing new talent into your organization. They need to learn your language, and you need to learn a little bit of theirs, because on the one hand, they need to fit and they need to feel like they're being productive. And you as an organization need to take advantage of the skills they bring. And you need to understand that, they come in with some new tools, and it's a waste if you don't learn to take advantage of them. And as Melissa was pointing out, if you understand the why as opposed to the how, then you can also say, well, this is how we did it. And you say, okay, well, that sounds good. How do we adapt ourselves as a MedTech company to take advantage of that? And sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. It's not always going to be possible. And this is going to become an even bigger issue as we get into this year of machine learning, AI. Like a lot of people are coming there even further back, right? It's not just software engineers coming from one industry to another. You're bringing data scientists in who are even further back from a quality setup. But if you tie them down, they would be simply unproductive. But on the other hand, you need to create an environment in which they can take advantage of their skills, but teach them also how to work in an environment and the constraints we operate under. So it's a cultural issue, and you have to adjust, and both sides need to learn a little bit of each other's language. And the QA people, there was a comment about QA people. QA people also need to learn to speak to these people. It's not like the outsiders need to adjust. you know, if you are in charge of processes, you need to be able to explain the whys of the process, not just the how. Because, you know, as somebody who immigrated here and came in from a different country, you know, sometimes things feel weird and wrong to you, and you need to learn why. And once you do, it makes sense sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. But you know, you live with it, and you can.
Xenius, did you ever consider a career as a marital counselor?
You know, there's an old joke in my family. They asked, "Have you seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the movie?" And my wife says, "Not only have I seen it, I have lived it." So yeah, we won't go there.
Excellent.
But
So
let me add to that or a little bit around this, right? I think that language issue is real. There is so much jargon in the medical device industry that I know it took me a long while to understand what these things, what they meant, and the why of these things. And then similarly on the software development side, and software engineering, boy, we use an awful lot of jargon there as well, that if you're not familiar with those, it can be just as much of a barrier. I think one of the challenges is really sort of understanding of the constraints that we have, which of those constraints in the industry are real and which ones are constructed based on a legacy, right? And so there are absolutely constraints and objectives, right? Some that are based on fundamentally keeping patients safe, being able to respond to regulators and demonstrate to regulators that what you're doing is safe and effective when they have very little time to actually spend on checking on your quality and regulatory and your how you are complying with the regulation. So they have a particular regulatory scheme that we are responding to. Those are real constraints. We may not like those constraints, but they are real constraints unless we fund the FDA to the tune of 10 to 20 times how much we're funding them. A lot of that work comes down to us. So it's kind of which of the constraints are real, which are constraints that, came out of the fact that so much of the regulations were written well before things like agile were even a big deal, even existed, and before they basically conquered the world, right, in all other industries. So I think that's the fundamental thing, which means really on both sides, you need engineers, right, who understand constraints and work through those constraints. On the quality side, you don't need a quality manager per se who can just say we are following these things. You need quality systems engineers that understand the reality of the constraints and can manage that. And they can work with the software engineers who understand other constraints better, and together they can actually come up with systems that work better.
I want to touch on something that Bernhard brought up, which is that a lot of what we have to do is to convince a disinterested third party that what we've done has been sensible, right? And that disinterested third party is not that disinterested. It's, the regulator, whether it's the FDA or another body. But essentially, as Bernhard mentioned, they don't have time to care about you, right? They need to perform their job as quickly and as efficiently as possible to either get you, approved or denied, without expending a tremendous amount of effort. And, I guess this touches on one of the biggest problems that I have in acclimating engineers is that, while they may have a lot of the good quality habits, right, the testing habits, code quality review, et cetera, what they're not used to is being able to prove it to a disinterested third party, right? They're not accustomed to having to provide the evidence. What they're accustomed to is peer review, right? Do their peers agree that they've done the right thing, that they've produced the right code, that they've met the requirements, et cetera? And a lot of times it's very informal, the way that they do this, right? So, the biggest source of friction for me is in getting the engineers to understand that we have to do some of the things that we do because somebody who doesn't care about you or your work has to look at something in order to be convinced that what you did is safe and prudent and appropriate, right? And it's so, we're not doing it because it's a some sort of a punishment, like we have to write this document or do this particular process. It's we want to be enabling a regulator to look at what we've done and agree that what we've done is correct and prudent. So, it's that aspect is really, for me, the highest source of friction, is getting them to understand why it is, or what it is that they're having to communicate, that it's something that they're accustomed to doing informally, but now we have to do it formally and explicitly.
Well, and the in-between layer between the customer and themselves, right? My customers are happy. They like what I do. Why do I need to do this extra thing, right? Because there's more than just your customers involved, right? Before you can make your customers happy, you have to make somebody else, well, happy may be the wrong word, but certainly satisfied. And so that in-between layer is the issue in many ways, right? The ability to make changes, the ability to adapt to new things, right? It's not just you and your customer, there's a third person in the room. Whereas in other industries, so long as your customer, now the flip side is also true. People forget about their customers sometimes in an effort to just satisfy regulators. And that also gets you in trouble, right? I mean, just clearing the FDA doesn't mean that anybody's going to buy anything you make. But
well, I'll tell you, I've been in, in the outside world and have been in the room with somebody other than the customer, which is the customer's attorney.
yes,
Right? When engaging in certain contracts with certain customers, they're going to bring their legal counsel to make sure that they are protected in this contractual relationship. And in a lot of ways, that's not that different from having the FDA sitting in the room.
mm-hmm.
Xenios, what are the things you've done in your curriculum? And maybe just take a minute to talk about the book and the Coursera course, because
So here's where we're going to get into cheap marketing here. So I'm going to stick it
there
back.
we go.
So people
No,
can.
but part of the reason Xenios is here is because you might ask why a professor teaching undergraduates and graduate students in engineering is on this conversation about moving people across industries. But for a long time, a lot of people said to us, one of the big challenges they have is they hire people from the tech industry to come into MedTech. These people have a really hard time understanding, why are we doing this stuff? And it was like, gee, wouldn't it be great if there was a curriculum we could give somebody their first day or two on the job to like, go read this. It's sort of a crash course in MedTech and what's different. And it turns out that Xenios wrote that as a book, and it's available. You can take it as a free 14-hour Coursera course offered through Yale. So tell a little bit about how you convey the why, because I thought one of the great things about the book was the case studies you gave.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, the challenge here is that, and obviously, when you try to explain the why, you are actually telling a fictional story, because often the why happened accidentally, and you're trying to put a nicer story around it, right, to make it sound better. But yeah, I mean, the problem you're dealing with, my mantra that I use in class when I talk about is, programming is easy, but figuring out what to program is hard, right? I'm not trying to teach people how to program here, I see, but somebody else will take care of that, and this is not the goal of what we do. But a lot of it is explaining all the little things that come around, just making sure that you know what those terms mean. My teaching philosophy right now is evolving to, do you know what to Google for? If you know the right terms, you can usually find the answer, but if you don't know the right terms, you're confused. And so when somebody walks in, I know you hear all these words, 510K, QMS, risk management, the works. What do all these things mean? So what we try to do in both the class and the book, and the Coursera class is literally free. You have to pay for a certificate, but you never have to pay anything if you just want the knowledge. The book is a book you have to pay. There's a webpage at the top, by the way, you can go find more information there. But what we try to do is walk people from the outside in, right? So we start with what is medical software and why is it different, and some of the issues we talked about, a little bit of review of what the regulatory structure is, with an emphasis on, how this applies to your structure. And again, if you came up from a proper software engineering training, a lot of these things are going to be the same. Don't implement features you don't need because you have to defend them. any good software engineer knows not to write extra code, right? You don't write extra code, it's a waste. And then a little bit of a description of the environment you have to live in, right? One of the challenges with a lot of medical software, as all of you listening probably know better than I do, is that your software isn't the whole story, right? It has to fit in some workflow. There are things before, there are things after. You're taking data from this database, you're pushing data to this database in the hospital, you're doing a small piece. So what is the environment? Who are all these people that are involved in the hospital? Who do you need to talk to? Some of the names that you may not have heard of before. Now, electronic health records right now seem to be the driving system of hospitals. Either you know they're there, you understand what role they play, or you don't. And then we have some unique issues, although they used to be more unique than they are anymore in terms of privacy. I mean, we have HIPAA issues in medicine. A lot of those privacy issues are becoming more generic now outside of the medical world, but especially HIPAA is the law in the US is for medical for now. And then from there, we get into walk through the life cycle process with, again, an emphasis on we do things a certain way because this is how you make it safe. This is what you have to check. The case studies at the end that Randy mentioned. So at the end of the book in the Coursera class, and when I teach, I make the students present them, when I teach in person, is that you learn a lot in engineering by seeing failures. Melissa is very close to one of the classic ones, which is the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, which every engineer watches as a YouTube video, like, don't do this. This is what's going to happen to you if you try to be too smart. But there are the same issues in software, right? There's a Thera case, which is a classic case of radiation treatment from the 80s, where software bugs actually killed people. And there, a lot of it is don't over-trust software. Software can actually get you in trouble. Be careful what you do. You know, cheap hardware sensors may actually save you a ton of software grief, which is at the end of the day. The other thing that the Thera people do is they do exactly what we sometimes do in medical software. They try to minimize dependencies. They wrote everything, right? They wrote everything from the operating system up. Probably not a good idea. You're not going to be able to write a good operating system compared to people who do it for a living. So how do you leverage things that are there and stable? The whole cloud story is a similar case now 40 years ago. And then we walk through some of the other cases, you know, that are out there. Some of them are not medical because we don't have a lot of information. Unless the government did an investigation, we don't have as many details. Healthcare.gov is sort of a counterexample. They tried to use Agile. They used it badly. So for those of you Agile fans, Agile doesn't solve all the problems in the universe. You know, all the way to the modern one, the last 2 years, many of you have heard about Boeing 737 MAX and the plane crashes. That was a software issue deep down. And a lot of it was, you could argue from a MedTech perspective that that's a usability issue, right? The user didn't know there was a system there. They didn't understand what their controls were doing. They didn't know that if they didn't react quickly, something would take over the plane and maybe it would be too late. A couple of plane crashes later, we found out at the cost of a few hundred people. So it's not a nice thing. So that's the kind of games we try to do with the students. We make them do projects. And a lot of it is the issues that I was addressing earlier. You sit and talk to a doctor and they tell you what their problem is. Well, how do you translate that into your language, your needs, your understanding of it? And how do you go back and forth with somebody who doesn't understand your language and you don't understand theirs? How do you just learn enough to talk? And when dealing, and I'm sure many of you who've dealt with medical professionals before, learning that balance between listening to them when they're speaking about their expertise and learning to ignore them when they tell you, I want you to use this database. Maybe that's what their friends across the street are using. That's not their domain. You need to be able to push back a little bit and say, no. I'll handle the software engineering. You just tell me the medical side of things. So those are all the issues we deal with. We do it well. I mean, we have 4 months. So I'm in the middle of a class right now. We're just getting started with projects. And the big change I have seen in the last 6-7 years of teaching it is from 7 years ago. It's only 7 years if you think about it. AI was an afterthought to now we have 4 projects this year and 3 of them are some version of machine learning or machine learning interfacing or usability or all of that. And that's going to be another revolution that's going to come to our ways. And again, in MedTech will be slower than the outside industry. And maybe we can learn from them a little bit as they develop those techniques in our life. So I don't know, maybe that's too much, Randy, but that's the description there. And I'll end the commercial here.
A former orthogonist who came from outside industry, Tanya, posed a question. So how do you, I'll throw this to everybody. How do you teach newbies what to care about? Do you teach them how to follow processes? Do you teach them to pay deeper attention to risky areas of a system?
It's hard, right? I mean, to
I-
me, Bernard, I'll take 2 seconds and I'll jump.
Yeah, go ahead.
To me, it's almost like I see my role. If I compare my role to your role, let's say I do 0 to 50 and you guys do 50 to 100. My role is to actually teach them what's there. At the very least, it's almost like these games like Civilization or something we have played as kids where you build them up. So I see what we do not as getting you to that level, but at least you know the map, you know these words, you know these terms. You know, obviously I have some of my biases as to how I teach it, but at the very least you should know these things. You should be aware of things. So when you start doing this for real and you start talking to people who will help you to take the next step, when they talk to you, understand what they're telling you. So that's what I saw, what we do. But Bernard, John, go ahead.
And I would say it is unrealistic to expect to get a newbie to, suddenly within, here, read this over the next week, and now you're going to be an expert in combining these different things. That's not how it works anywhere. And so I think the thing is really, bringing. Either you're in a situation where, let's say you're a startup and everyone is figuring it out and no one has the knowledge, then you're going to make a whole bunch of mistakes. You may figure out something really great that works for you, but it's going to be trial and error, right? So it's a question of what kind of a team do you have? If that's the situation you're in, you're a startup like that, then go get outside help, get mentoring, partner with someone who knows what they're doing, and then sort of learn from that. Within an organization, it depends on, whether you are already an organization that has incorporated, software development best practices and married those in with the constraints of the regulations and the quality standards and guidance, et cetera, and you are just bringing them on into a team, right? So if it's a junior developer, I'm not expecting them to architect a system and understand software safety classification and all of those things. I need the architects to do that, but those junior people need to do good software development, and they're going to learn it by participating in the teams, by participating in risk management meetings and activities, and learning it along the way, just as they would learn, architecture along the way, and improve their craft. I think that's how ultimately that works in an organization. If you have an organization that is, we do, waterfall everything, and the software developers, who knows what they're doing, and you're trying to get that to work, then and you're bringing newbies into that environment, that's a recipe for not getting anywhere, and for those newbies deciding that they're going to leave for greener pastures that are less frustrating, and never come back to the medical device.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to just mention here is it's good for people to understand what their managers are worried about. Even if they don't have to do it, why is this person asking me to do it this way? What is driving everything from the business level aspects of a company, right? We need to get this out because otherwise we're not going to make a balance sheet. Otherwise we're going to go under. Two, what are the constraints my boss is operating under? What is she worried about? It will help me understand why I'm being asked to do certain things. And, when everybody has to make decisions at any level, and if I know what everybody else is worried about, I'm going to make the decision in such a way to make it easier for them or harder for them, right? So those are some of the issues as well. The one other thing that comes to mind is that when we launched the Coursera class, I thought that most of the people who take it would be like college students and junior developers would end up. We're getting a lot of regulatory affairs people and quality people who take it. And I think that's important too. Like, those people will not be software developers, but they need to understand what software developers do. Because otherwise they're important. Like I'm sure some of you have seen questions like, how many errors are there and how many lines of code? I'm sure that you cannot give a good answer of that, right? I mean, that's a realistic statement to us. There are questions that make no sense to a software engineer at some level. And they need to understand what the software process is and some of the constraints we are operating under so that they can understand. So it's all a little bit of each. There's a question here.
Yeah, I just on that, I think, very much agree with that. I think, again, what you're looking for on all sides, and which is hard to find, you need enough people that have on either side that have an engineering mindset, right? You need people to sort of execute and follow the rules. Not everyone can invent new ways of doing things, but if you're going to transform and get the best of both worlds, or apply modern practices within the constraints, you need to have people who are thinking about that and figuring out how to use fast feedback loops within this. So that's not just engineers, and not engineers and developers are going to be skilled at that kind of thing, but you need that in your quality and regulatory teams as well. You need those people. Just as with your legal teams, you need people who can figure things out, and then you need people who can follow that, right? So that if you think about that, that goes all throughout the entire process, right? One of the areas that it's been difficult to do this is in the human factors side of things, where there is, as with many other things, this has been treated as a, we do big upfront and big at the end, but we don't really get feedback in between. So very waterfall human factors work. And if you think about this in other industries, we have user experience design and user research work, and everyone's doing, really fast feedback loops to improve the user experience and usability of something, so that you're not saying, we're going to do one giant test at the beginning and 2 or 3 along the way, and then something else along the way. You're doing 3 user Thursdays, fast feedback loops, etc. Designers coming from outside of the industry, usability folks, they understand that. But then when you have human factors staff that have been working in a waterfall way, it's a change in mindset, and they have to sort of adapt to that as well. That's, I think you can point to so many different areas where that's the case.
So you mentioned human factors. Sorry, Randy, if I can just take a few, I want to get on my soapbox just for a second, because since Bernhard mentioned human factors, right? Everything that we do as engineers and developing products is all driven by human factors, believe it or not, right? So the scientific method is essentially a process that solves a number of human factors problems, right? We have our processes that we do because humans make mistakes. Our human brains are just really sloppy and horrible machines. They're not very accurate. They're not very repeatable. We develop these processes to solve the problems that are introduced by human behavior, right? Natural human behavior. Our process for quality, right? Everything that we do, every step that we take is to deal with the fact that humans make mistakes, right? Not intentionally, not through necessarily negligence, just because of the way our brains are wired. When you think about any process that we have in our organization, whether it's our overall product development process, our quality process, whatever it is, regulatory compliance process, these are all processes that are there to solve these human factors problems. And what I kind of find fascinating about this, and Bernhard touched on this, is that did the human factors department do a human factor study on their own process? Right? If they did, they would discover that their process is very, very inefficient, probably even unreliable, right? And so, you need to be thinking about, the sort of the human factors aspects of all of these different processes, and be aware of the fact that all that we're really trying to do is prevent ourselves from being burned by, our squishy monkey brains. But I think this is what makes these processes rational, right? And you can explain to an engineer that the process that we're asking you to follow is rational. It was thought of, it was designed very specifically for a specific set of purposes to solve a specific set of problems, many of which are human factors based. And, I think that can connect with them, but, I do think that probably the amount of human factors training that we have out in the field is probably, only a 1% of really what it needs to be. So maybe that's another thing to think about, is just to get your engineers some human factors training.
So I do want to note the time. So we promised everybody would get through the core content by 12:50. It's 12:51. I think we've hit that, but we got a whole bunch of questions that have come in. I'll invite the panelists to take a look at the questions. You can answer them online, but some of them I want to pose here as well, because I think they're really good.
There was one in particular, sorry, Randy, from Greg, which was, Randy and/or Bernhard, can you speak to how a company should decide when they hire an outside firm like yours to build the connected solutions versus building the system from the inside? And so I think, this is there are a lot of different answers to this, right? And sort of it depends on ultimately what you've got and where you're trying to go, right? So in some cases, there are companies where, let's say building out mobile and cloud is important, but not sort of their core differentiator, right? There are a lot of startups, even later stage startups, where they're saying, we're getting to this point, this is necessary, we're not going to build out this expertise. We're going to have someone else do this because they're going to get us there faster and we're going to get sold to someone else. So that's one reason why you might say, just outsource this to someone else. There's another circumstance where this has to be core to what you're doing, right? This is a new skill set. You're not just doing it one-off for a product. You're going to be building out a whole series of products, and in that case, the core knowledge eventually has to be in-house. This is a key skill, key thing you have to be good at, in which case you want to build that in-house. If you have all the people that have done that before, and they're able to sort of like do that, rather than having to figure it out, then you don't need an outside firm, right? But if it is a question of both needing to, accelerate, get there quickly, and implement best practices without sort of, stubbing your toes and finding out a year later that you did it the wrong way, then you need someone from the outside to help you and maybe sort of co-develop or kind of coach you through the process, depending on where you're at. So it's a question of where you're at. I think one of the challenges for many startups is they've got bits and pieces. And one of the challenges for large medical device companies is the kind of modern software and doing work in a fast feedback loop fashion, as you have to do for mobile and cloud, is kind of a new thing, or a different set of things you adapt to. I've seen companies who have managed to do this all themselves without outside help, and pioneer certain things and do great things. But that's the exception more than the rule.
Let me ask you a question, Bernhard. So something that I see outside in the area of software architecture is that as companies get bigger, they tend to want to consolidate software architecture and create a set of standards, right? All of their software teams must use these tools, these components in this particular way, so that they have uniformity, and they view it as being like economically valuable, right? They're saving money by having consistency throughout the organization. And I think a lot of what you were just talking about involves, if you're a larger company, being able to have a portion of your quality and compliance arm that is willing to do things a little bit differently for some particular project, right? You know, and I'm picturing in my mind, you know, companies that maybe have developed a consolidated, singular, monolithic approach to quality and compliance, and they don't see that it's valuable to maybe do an experiment on the side to try something a little bit different. And I'm just wondering what your experience with that has been, interfacing with companies.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, you know, it things always move back and forth with large companies, you know, and you know, to what extent they're looking to consolidate, or then, oh, consolidation isn't working, so now we got to sort of let each of these areas work differently and back and forth. I don't know that there's a silver bullet there. I think you know, it depends on again what you're trying to do, right? If the problem you're solving is that you have, like, you know, a lack of quality in your processes, right, and that things are dropping and you don't have consistency, then there may be a reason to sort of, like, you know, start bringing things in that way. And in other cases, if you are saying, hey, we have new things that if we're going to solve these problems or take advantages of these technologies, we have to do something new. You have to be adaptable in either case. So that's hard for an organization and to do. And the larger the organization is, the harder those two poles are for something. I think, you know, there's the opposite problem that also happens with very, very large companies, very large medical device companies that have maybe, you know, a number of different verticals. And I've seen this, I won't name names, but with very large companies where, oh, there is a center of excellence over here in this one area. And you know, us having worked with that area, we can say these guys are doing something really good, but it is not propagated at all throughout the other areas, and that's a big challenge. How do you get sort of expertise and best practices from within one part of a large organization? Say there's stuff in the diabetes area, but in that's not there in neuromodulation or cardiac monitoring. You know, how do you get these things across, especially when there's not really any incentives for those groups to cross-pollinate, right? There's not any, no one is measured based on how they're helping another group within the larger organization. It's the bottom line of their own group.
And so now when we're talking about trying to bring in people from outside of MedTech to try to freshen our gene pool by adding some, you know, outside experience, you know, we've touched on that almost a requirement in order to get the value out of these people is to be more flexible within your processes, right? That you need to be able to adapt to them as much as they need to adapt to you. And so, you know, as we've been talking about different sized companies and the different levels of flexibility in their quality and regulatory processes, do you think that within MedTech that there are certain types of companies that are going to be more successful at integrating people from the outside? Is it a size thing? Is it, you know, because a lot of what you described to me sounds like a company that grew through acquisition, right? And then they end up being verticals because they were just never fully integrated, and it's probably a good thing that they weren't. But, you know, is there a certain kind of company in MedTech that's going to be more successful at integrating people from the outside?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I have you know, a good answer to that. I mean, I think, you know, it comes down to top leadership really being and being able to adapt as an organization, right? And set direction and give people you know, the tools and the support they need, and having the discernment to know what where you're trying to go with this stuff. I do think that it is easier, you know, if you don't have the, you know, the more digitally native you are, and the less you have like this, you know, big set of big equipment in the hospital, et cetera, the more you're going to face the pressures, and those companies that have to deal with those types of things are going to be, and as kind of existential, are either going to fail fast or they're going to adapt and figure that out, right? So the less legacy you have and the more digitally native you are, the better, to some extent. All those companies are going to have their own set of challenges and difficulties. It's hard to grow and a company and deal with those things. But that's where I would say, you know, they're the ones that are most able to take advantage of that.
I mean,
I would say I don't know that there's a size. Sorry, thank you. I don't know that there's a size necessarily that's a predictor about the ability to adapt, although typically very large organizations will be a little bit slower to move. But I've seen some large organizations that do some of these things, like spinning off an experimental group to do fast feedback type things and bring things back to the organization. I think it still really comes down to the culture of the company and their willingness to be in that sort of continuous improvement mindset to begin with. And you can do that large company, you can do that at scale, and you can do that in a small company. And I've also seen that you can have small companies where, especially if you're really small and you've got one person that is overseeing an entire area or is the entire area, it can almost be harder sometimes to change a company whose way of doing things is one person's way of doing things or one person's philosophy. When you add some additional folks, you've inherently got more mindsets in there, and that group might be a little bit easier to change, even if it's small. Then in my experience, as companies scale up, there's a big jump between having one person who's doing an activity and having a second person who's doing the activity. Moving that process is from one person's way of managing time or tracking tasks or doing things to something that multiple people can do successfully in the organization is that big kind of scaling gap. It's easier to go from 2 to 4 to 5 than it is to go from 1 to 2. And so if that one person has a continuous improvement change mindset, then they can move. But if that one person thinks that their way of doing things is the best way to do it and isn't interested in what a second person might bring to the table, then that small organization may be very small and able to move quickly, but their culture is preventing them from doing that. And I think we've touched on it through some of the questions here, but I think it's really key and worth repeating is that it's not just about bringing tech people into MedTech and making them MedTech. It has to be that there is willingness to change and adapt and continue to move on both sides. And I think that's inherently good for any organization. If you aren't bringing in outside people into MedTech, for you and yourself and your processes and keeping up with technology, it's important for you to have that kind of mindset of continuous improvement and being willing to adapt to things that are coming out. Even if it's new FDA guidance that, you know, maybe the FDA moves slow and it takes an act of Congress to change something and their guidance comes out 3 years before they start requiring it, you still have to make adaptations to what's happening in your industry, your technology, and the regulations. And so if you as an organization have a way to bring people in, to make change, to learn new ideas, to implement them, I think those are the basics that are going to help you bring in people from other industries and incorporate them and give them a home. As well as, you know, there's probably some red flags for the external people. You've got folks that are used to working in a very cowboy agile format, or the type of engineer that will say, I don't have to do documentation because we're agile. That's not going to be a good fit for your organization, and probably not even if you aren't MedTech, that may not necessarily be a helpful individual that's really going to come in and adapt and change and push you forward.
I mean, I would say that you touched it like indirectly there. Training top management is also part of the problem here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many of the senior managers in any company above a certain size have serious software training outside the software companies, right? And teaching them that, you know, software, you know, the easiest one on the lot. Adding 10 software engineers isn't going to give you a benefit in the short term, right? if you guys read the healthcare.gov crisis from the other day, the first thought, well, we need to hire a lot more people and then we'll fix the problem faster. Yes, thank you. Right? I mean, you introduce another 20 software engineers to a team, that's not going to help you. It will help you 2 years down the road, but not in the first 3 weeks. In the first 3 weeks, it's just going to be meetings until all these people get up. So part of it is also, and this is a little bit of what we're, so two of my colleagues, when we wrote the textbook, are MD, MBAs, and a lot of their interest is just the second aspect. Right? How do you train people to manage these things? And what is the information they need to know so that they can, you know, understand what their software team is telling them? And why are these things taking so much time? And why is this a problem? And why do we need to do? Because it's not the same. We bring a manager from an unregulated industry into a MedTech thing. There are things you have to worry about that are slightly different. Randy.
So hang on, let me ask something to all of you, because there's definitely been a recurring theme here of jack of all trades, master of none, deep specialist kind of thing. You know, you need a lot of skills. You want your engineers to do human factors engineer, MedTech people understand MedTech. When and your manager has to understand all this. When is this supposed to happen in a company with the kind of deadlines we see and schedules and training budgets? Like, you can't osmosis all of this. So how do you prioritize?
I mean, anytime. So the question is, what are you trying to sort of change an organization, right? Is that part of what you're trying to do, or are you just trying to get something done, right? So if you're trying to sort of get something done, or you have a new area that it's a lot easier to sort of start this with a new group that is doing a new project, right? Then you can build out the team, select the right people, do all of those things and get that going. That's probably the right way of dealing with kind of changing an organization. Basic, change management is do a pilot, get learnings from the pilot and then figure out how to then take those learnings and what people did and then bring that through into other parts of the organization, right? It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like you can say, we're going to, suddenly change everything, teach them something with a couple of webinars and le voila, our organization has changed, right? That's not how it works for anything.
Well, and when it comes to training, right, and getting more experience in different areas for folks, I always look at an employee as a depreciating asset, a depreciating asset that gets more expensive every year, which doesn't make any sense. But if you don't continuously invest in that asset, it will depreciate to zero, right? What profession do we have where somebody says, well, I learned everything, I'm good, I'm fine, right? I don't need to learn anymore. I can't, there might be something, but I can't think of what it would be. We always have to learn, adapt, and grow because the world around us is learning, adapting, and growing, right? So if you in your organization are not actively training and evolving your people, they're essentially going to just wither away and be a net liability for you. And, the training does include things which, folks might not want to learn, right? But too bad, right? I mean, you're in this job, right? You're in this career. There are things that you just have to learn whether you like it or not. And, I'm not suggesting that you send somebody to some, re-education camp and force them to learn these things, but, as part of your regular mentoring process, which everybody should have in their organization, you just need to be introducing these concepts as part of the individual's continuous learning process.
Yeah.
I think to kind of Randy's question about prioritizing it, there's never enough time, there's never enough budget to do everything that you want, and you have to look at prioritization of it. If your organization already has good processes for some of these things, it may not be as much of a priority to implement new things, but you still have to prioritize continuing to support the things that are there and are happening and are good. And if your organization is having some of these struggles, it may be that type of risk analysis or impact analysis approach to look at and say, if we don't make this change, it doesn't matter if we get this next feature out because we are going to fall apart or we're not going to deliver. We're not going to deliver the right feature if we aren't doing these things to get ourselves working correctly internally. and being able to have those important conversations about all the activities that you do as an organization, everything that you put your emphasis and resources on, and what is actually going to bring you the most benefit. It's a product owner answer, sorry.
But Randy, I guess the answer I would give is, in part, it also depends on who you hire, right? I mean, in a complex multidisciplinary space like this one, you need to have people who are just a little bit curious about what goes outside their domain. I mean, the sort of person who wants to work on like the details of database implementation, maybe fine, you may need one of those people. Those people may be super valuable, but you can't just have that. You need enough people who just want to learn a little bit outside just their area. And, you know, I was told as a young researcher when we're doing image-guided surgery projects, you want the surgeon who says, how can you do this better? Who just cares a little bit about what you do. That is a good collaborator. Whereas the person who says, just solve me my problem, that's not a good collaborator, right? They're just, it's the same. You need a certain number of people in an organization like this who want to know, you know, go talk to the QA person as a software engineer says, okay, what forms are you filling? What is the information that you really need? Maybe there's a way for me to provide it to you more easily. Let me learn a little bit about what you do. It's that you need people who are interested. And if you're hiring people who are not curious about what everybody around them is doing, it's going to be a lot harder. So I think it starts there in some ways. Now, it's specialists. There's no escape.
I think that's that. So I'm going to pitch a book for people here. I can highly recommend Patrick Lencioni's The 6 Types of Working Genius, which really talks about the different sort of skills and personality traits that you need in order to actually, you know, start something new, get it going, getting it all the way through any kind of work, any kind of invention, etc. And it turns out that each of us really is only really good at 2 of those 6 things, and competent at 2 and horrible at 2 of those things. And if you don't have all of those things together in a team or in an organization, then it's going to fall apart. So what you just said, Xenios, I think is absolutely correct. It's a question of, you know, having those different skill sets together and those different types of people. You need people who are good at invention. You need people who are good at figuring out whether that invention is a good idea. You need people who can galvanize people and people that can enable them. And then you need people who can get the stuff done. And that's not
build that invention.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
As we sort of start to wrap, I hate to disrupt the conversation, but I want to make sure we come with a good conclusion. First of all, I'll issue a challenge now that we've recommended 2 books, Xenios's book and the Patrick Lencioni book. If anybody in the audience chooses to read both and send me a summary of them, I will send you your very own orthogonal sweatshirt. It has our kind of funky logo on the front, and on the back, it has our software engineering credo, move faster and break nothing. So send me proof that you've read both and we'll go for it. So if I'm going to ask a closing question, people are going back to their day jobs now. They've obviously hung in here for quite a while, 75 minutes, because they're interested in the topic. Give everybody one best practice gold nugget to take away. If you're going to do one thing tomorrow, and you could set the context if that's too broad, do this, and then give one, for the love of God. If you're not going to do one thing, just don't do this one, please. I'll go through Xenios.
Well, the first thing to do is really easy for me, right? There's a Coursera class you should recommend to all your new people. It may not be the greatest class ever invented, but it's the greatest class out there because it's the only one, unfortunately. It would be great if there were more. I don't claim to have answered every question in the universe, but it's much better than nothing. So if you have people who are coming in new, it's free, do it. It's good for you and for your company. And, you know, you can tell me what I did wrong when I put it. And there are plenty of things off. I don't have no thing. Can I pass on the thing not to do it? Do it as a second cycle so I can think it through?
Yeah, sure. We can come around to you. And by the way, I would like to add an endorsement for the course that I think for a lot of companies that are bringing on new people to MedTech from a lot of functions, I would recommend day one on the job, let them get their HR stuff done and their laptop and get their logins working. And days 2 and 3, let them take this course on their own and then come back on day 3, because it's a great immersion technique in week 1, in my opinion. All right, Melissa. Actually, why don't we just do the one do, and then we'll come around again with the one do.
I think my do would be just to ask a question, right? And the next time that you run into something that kind of feels like you don't understand why you're doing it, be willing to ask that question and understand and engage that curiosity that Zinio spoke about to learn a little bit more. And I think, you know, kind of engaging and building that type of folks who are curious and understanding why something is there, understanding a little bit more about why a quality person is asking you to do a certain piece of document, or asking why an engineer is telling you something doesn't make sense. Engage that curiosity in the next chance you have.
That's why. Larkin, one do.
Yeah, so when hiring software engineers, and I'm specifically going to talk about engineers with more than 3 years of experience, junior engineers, I'll cut more slack, but do a live coding exercise, right? You can do this remotely. You can do it where it's basically a screen share and you can watch them in visual code or whatever tool they want to use, write the code. You know, and it's not about making sure they can actually, you know, solve the problem that you've given them, but you want to hear them talk about their rationale, how they're thinking about solving the problem. And for me, one of the things that I absolutely look for is, do they incorporate any unit tests into the code that they're producing for you live? It's very, very, very good sign if you see somebody exhibit test-driven development habits, right? Do they write a test first to basically demonstrate what the code should, how it would be used, right? And essentially you can do that with a unit test, you know, because you want to see them think about how the code is going to be used before they go and try to design the solution. Because a lot of times an engineer they first immediately think about, well, this is how I would solve the problem, but they're not really thinking about the use case. They're thinking about their conceptualization of the ask, right? So it's very, very helpful to see them if they show any testing there, and I think that's going to make somebody, that's going to indicate somebody that's going to integrate more easily into a MedTech company.
I would say, you know, look for people that are, you know, curious and continuing to learn, right? Are these people that have exhibited that, right? So, you know, I always ask questions about, you know, the things they've learned on the way. What are they reading now? What are they doing? All of those things are necessary in a space that's evolving quickly, right? Just because you know how to do code one thing right now, 5 years from now, you're going to be working in different technologies doing different things, right? So having that curiosity and that mindset is super important. I think one of the, I would say the negative, right, and this is a general one, is really, I've made the mistake before and paid for it heavily in hiring someone who was really, really smart, individually brilliant, but could not work well with other people. And so it's easy to say, oh my God, this person knows all of these things. And then you put them on your team, and instead of making the team better, everyone's worse. And so that is like, you know, stay away from that. That does not work unless, you know, you're only hiring that one person and they don't need to work with anyone else, which is, you know, not the situation any of us are in.
Rare.
I had a team leader who used to describe that phenomenon as hiring that person was like losing 3 good engineers.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So you want the negatives now?
Yeah. Give a worst practice to avoid.
So a friend tell the story. I heard this from a friend, said that he finished his PhD, he was hired into a device company, he's ready to show up and impress. And he said, day one, they hand me the quality manuals. And they said, read it. And that was like 3 days later before he emerged out of that. Right? That's not where you start.
right? The quality monitor is important, the procedures are important, the rules are important. But if it takes somebody a month to emerge out of your paperwork, they may emerge somewhere else pretty quickly as well, if they can, right? So, yeah.
Context.
Yeah.
Right. All in context. All right, Melissa.
I was kind of debating between a couple of them here, but I think I'll just go simple and straightforward to the point of this. Next time you have a hiring opportunity with someone who seems like a good candidate, but they don't have experience in MedTech, don't dismiss them out of hand.
Mhm.
Agree. The best ones that I've hired have come out of MedTech, but brought the right mindset. Absolutely.
I would endorse that on Melissa herself, who didn't come out of MedTech and did a webinar with us recently on fusing Agile with EQMS that knocked the socks out of a lot of people. We're still getting phone calls about that one. So, Larkin.
Yeah, so I guess my don't is don't tell an engineer because I said so, right? Like when engineers, like from the outside world, they will complain about your process. One of the things that I get a lot is, I just want to write the code, right? I just want to write the code. Or, if there's something that they need to get to production, look, it's just, the code is clean. I just want to push it to production, right? Why are you getting in my way? And that resistance is actually good and healthy for you. But you also have to be able to, get the engineer to comply, right? And so rather than saying, look, this is the way the process is, this is what the FDA requires, this is the rules, you have to follow the rules or get out, right? You don't want to do that. You need to be able to explain to the engineer why they need to follow the process that is in front of them, and that it's actually beneficial. And the exercise achieves two things. One is it helps to educate the engineer, but two, it may also help you question the efficiency or the effectiveness of your own process. Right? Maybe there is something wrong with your process and it needs to be tweaked. A lot of times it's just going to be the engineer needs to have a little more discipline, and that's fine too. But having that be a conversation is more valuable than just saying, shut up and do the work.
All right. So it's leverage people in their brainware. That's why you hired them. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank all the audience members for hanging on with us for basically 90 minutes. We really appreciate it. We don't take that for granted. We know you all have very busy lives, and hopefully you've walked away with, if it was 90 minutes, at least 180 minutes worth of gold nugget content, that we packed in here. I want to thank our guests, Zanius and Larkin, for coming out, and Melissa and Bernhard for joining us again. We are always looking for feedback on this session, ideas for new ones. We want to do content that engages you. We have lots of content that engages us. That's not particularly interesting to you necessarily. So we want to know what you're looking for. User-centered content. So please reach out to us. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much to everybody.
Thanks, everyone.